Good evening and welcome to another episode of What Now Irishman. My guest today is a gentleman called Emmet Connor. You probably know him from his show Resolving Reality. I'm going to bring him up now and we're going to get straight into it. Emmet, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good morning, Martin. How's it going?
Not too bad, not too bad. We can deal with your life after I throw the question at you. What now Irishman? Go for it.
Oh wow, yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? My kind of work drags me into different areas, and as you know, I kind of specialize in Marxism or globalism repackaged, basically. So I talk to patriots all across the world, but I am Irish first and foremost. I know that the country's changed in ways that we don't want, and there are ways out of this, but I think only if certain conditions are met. So as we kind of, people like us tend to agree, taking a nationalistic stance is clearly the antithesis to globalism. Globalism, the idea of creating one world, open borders, and so on, and it brings in all these changes that we don't want. So I think that in terms of What Now Irishman, it's that trying to make nationalism successful is the way out of this mess, pretty much.
So nationalism, what does it mean to you? What does that word actually mean to you?
Great question. Well, the way I look at it is, if globalism is the idea of creating this, all these member state countries of the world, nationalism is the idea of doing the opposite of that in so many ways, where we keep our sense of our difference as a people, not just ethnically, but culturally as well. We're able to self-govern, we're able to manage our own land and resources, and we prioritize Irish people within Ireland because we are quite a very, very small percentage of the world's population, and we deserve to have a country of our own, of course. More Irish people exist outside of Ireland than inside of it, particularly in the States, as far as I know, but are people of Irish genetic stock, should I say, Celtic genetic stock. But so nationalism being the idea of protecting all of that and allowing us to continue to exist, pretty much, and that we're not just swept away in this wave of, so-called multiculturalism, where, essentially the end product of that is that Irish people would become a minority in their own country and become kind of almost swept away in this internationalist agenda, pretty much.
So we'll talk about the internationalist agenda and globalism. So my own personal views would be, and I read and I research and I look back. I never get too caught up in the past, but I acknowledge that it exists and these things happened and these people existed. And I believe greed has a huge amount to play. I don't think there is one individual bad guy sitting in a chair with a white cat. It's not as simple as that, unfortunately. I always describe it as if you put the Olympic flag lying flat and turn it into tables. There's 5 large tables there, but they're all interlinked. And you have all these different organizations that have massive influence in pursuing their own agendas and their own goals. Well, and these are governmental influence. It is commerce influence. It's everything. Entertainment influence. What would your stance on that be? Would you agree or disagree? Is there a big bad evil out there, or is it just a massive system that's been built over the last century and a half that is just its own thing now, its own entity that is going to be very difficult to defeat?
Exactly. You said it there, and I totally agree with what you're saying. And in fact, it ties into my work that I think it's very unconstructive for us to look at ourselves as, kind of like victims in a way, where there's someone else to blame or there's some sort of bad guy behind the curtain or whatever. I used to think that way myself. When I was younger, I was, in my teens and early 20s, I was interested in stuff like the New World Order, the more conspiratorial side of it. Who's behind the curtain? Is it the Freemasons, the Illuminati, and so on? That's how I used to think. But yeah, I agree. I think there's many different groups and individuals involved with this, and it's clearly global. When you talk to people on the political right, patriots, nationalists, libertarians, whatever they call themselves, if you talk to those people all across the world, in Canada and the States, Australia, even the France, Spain, Italy, anywhere really, they're all talking about the same issues: mass immigration, trans ideology, etc., that are being brought in on top of us. So it's clearly global. There's a hell of a lot of people involved, and I don't think we can pin it down to one group. The way I look at it, Martin, is I judge people or groups dependent upon their ideology. What's their stance? Clearly, there's a mindset in the world that nationalism is bad and you're going to be, globe-trotting Nazis and so on. And I think that mindset has fed into this internationalist idea. We'd all be better off in a big collective in the world, which clearly is an experiment that's failing. And we can see that happening across Europe. So I'm in total agreement. It's not as simple as zoning in on a particular individual or group at all.
Yeah, you mentioned Nazism there, and I know National Socialism exists in Ireland. It does, and there's some actual brilliant people involved in it. And
Yes.
I've spoken to many of them. You also have in one of the previous interviews I did, we talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect, where Mount Stupid, you get a little bit of knowledge and you're stuck up on top of Mount Stupid, thinking you have all the answers. Unfortunately, there's a huge amount of people that are in, and I'm only slowly descending it. I'm only still gaining knowledge, so I'm not I'm not disparaging people or looking down on people. It takes a realization that you actually know nothing, and you have to slowly descend this Mount Stupid into the pits of depression, and then you realize that you can never know everything, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there who are stuck on top of that mountain and think that they have all of the answers, and there is just this one bad entity behind it. Mainly the Jews. They talk about the Jews all the time, and I look at it from now. Here's the other side of that argument. Mossad is the most dangerous intelligence agency on the planet, without a shadow of a doubt. It is, and you could say the CIA are bad, but Mossad is way, way, way worse. So there are huge global influences that we, as just individuals, just two Irishmen sitting here talking, we can't affect that. We do not have the power, the wealth, the status, whatever you want to call it, to deal with it. So I kind of just go, well, why would I waste my energy on something that I can't change or affect? I have this big thing about looking inward. I respect all world leaders who only look inward. Trump has my respect because, for the most part, he seems to be looking inward in relation to making his own country good. Putin is exactly the same. Fix my own country, mind my own people. Any global leader that does that and goes inside my borders, that's all I care about, and I don't care about what's happening in the rest of the world, with the exception of making sure I get good trade deals for my people that benefit my people. That's what I want as a leader or a government. We most certainly do not have that. What would your thoughts on that be?
Oh, 100%. I mean, when you look at, I remember years ago, I was having a conversation with my older brother who we were talking about the political parties in Ireland and left and right wing. And speaking of the Nazism stuff, I was kind of attracted by that years ago, and I kind of bought into that. And I have all these different views over the years. But anyway, I had this conversation once about the Irish government and so on, the different groups and parties involved. And I thought, well, really, it's kind of a bit of a circus, because they're all, whatever they call themselves, centre right, centre left, or Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, they're all essentially playing along to the globalist agenda, and the rest is all just bitching. An argument between Micheál Martin and Paul Murphy or Leo Varadkar and Mary Lou McDonald. It doesn't really matter. The country's still pushing in the same direction, and the establishment we have is clearly tied in with the European Union and the globalist agenda, and they're not putting Irish people first. And I agree with your sentiment. You can't really, we're in no position to control the world or be a global power. We have to prioritize our own issues and so on, look after our own patch, and have a reasonable amount of constructive diplomacy and trade with other nations and so on. I completely agree with that sentiment. But yeah, the major problem, as I kind of mentioned at the start, is nationalism is clearly the solution and should be the driving force to direct the way the country should go. But the establishment clearly is opposed to that. And you saw Micheál Martin famously made those statements in the Dáil a few years ago. I put this in my book, where he talked about, that backwards idea of nationalism. In another interview, and he associated it with imperialism and so on, which is, of course, Marxist globalist talk. And then you had Leo Varadkar once in an interview said that, he said something like, I am the European Union on these matters. The Irish government and the European Union are all one when it comes to Brexit. So that's what we're dealing with. These are the kind of characters involved, and they're clearly not nationalist.
How does, okay, so I can understand how a school teacher becomes leader of Fianna Fáil. That makes perfect sense to me, because I understand local politics extremely well, having been involved in it. Explain to me how a gay immigrant or son of an immigrant becomes the leader of what would have been the most right-leaning political party from its inception. in Fine Gael. How did that happen? How does that happen? Is that the globalist agenda at work and at play?
Oh, 100%. And this ties into my work again, because again, there's patterns here. If we talk to patriots across the world, you look at, say, your Justin Trudeau in Canada, another gay man, there's loads of examples of people in the oppressed class, whether it be gay people, black people, trans, whatever it is, anything but straight white males are getting into, and women as well, of course, with the feminist movement, are more and more in positions of power and authority, because they tend to go along with all of this open borders woke stuff. I'm not saying all gay men are the same, or all women are the same, or all black people are the same,
But
but
that's
there
the
certainly
majority.
is. Yeah. Well, there's certainly a pattern, absolutely a pattern, and they tend to go along with this stuff. So Leo Varadkar, you look at his views and his opinions on all things. Look at what he said after the abortion referendum. He's coming out with all this garbage that, in 2018, he was saying, oh, it's a great thing that compassion thrived over hate and all this gibberish and so on. So it's a great point. It's always the oppressed now are seem to be at the forefront of this.
Well, it's the weaponizing and monetizing the victim class and the victim mentality. How do you I, I'm an extremely empathetic person. I have huge amounts of empathy. It's in my family. That's just who we are. So I have empathy for those I know are being sold a lie. Um, but I struggle to, especially when I converse with them, I struggle to be able to lift the veil from their eyes through conversations like this and just healthy debate and conversation. Their emotion, their emotional response defies all logic, and I would think through logic. Of course, I do have a heart, and of course, you know what I mean. My feelings will affect my judgments and my thingies, but in essence, I make logical decisions. Um, I see, this is going to sound terrible, but a subset of humanity who've lost that ability to logically think, and they are completely driven by emotion, which is so easy to manipulate. I know how to manipulate emotions. You know how to manipulate emotions. If you've got a think tank that's funded, it becomes a very, very, very easy thing to do. How do you combat that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Martin. It's actually right to the heart of everything. And this is why in 2018, when I was doing the podcast and I was going to do a documentary, it turned into a book. I thought, this woke stuff, or whatever you want to call it, this revolutionary activist mindset is absolutely emotion based. And because of the nature of indoctrination, and it does sound brutal, I think that sometimes people get to a certain point of indoctrination, they're just too far gone, particularly when people get older. As we get older, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. There's a reason for that. It's neural plasticity. The neurons in our brains aren't as flexible as they were when we were younger. Not everyone's the same, but sometimes, put it this way, there's a big difference between, say, someone in their mid 40s who's a full-on communist who talks about all the usual stuff. You're probably wasting your time. If you're talking to an 18, 19-year-old who's in university, who's a little bit contaminated or brainwashed, maybe you've got a chance to turn them around. Of course, we have to try, and we have to judge each person as an individual. And I've been a big advocate, Martin, of people understanding the brainwashing, understanding the ideology, and learning to make good character judgments. Because
Mm.
to try and derail this movement, we have to use a healthy amount of discrimination, when it comes to letting these people into power, because they just cause havoc, whether it's on social affairs and economics, when it comes to borders, you name it. They're an absolute mess, but they're fanatics, and some of them can't be reasoned with.
I have a staunch belief that, like, if it ever happens, that we have a socialist government, we have a Sinn Féin, People Before Profit, Social Democrats, Labour government in charge, I have no choice but to leave this country.
Yeah.
I won't be able to survive it, because I won't be able to maintain civility and maintain my end of the social contract, which I have always maintained. I will have two choices: take up arms or leave. That is, there's I'm resolute and resolved in that. That is something that that I know, if it happens, they're my two choices. It's the men who wanted to be left alone passage. So Marxism, okay, cultural Marxism, communism, so many different names, so many different ideologies that are all similar and aligned. I only go so far back I don't go back to the Bolsheviks. I go back to affirmative action in the 1960s in America, where I believe the European influence, that what Marxism after, and again, this is my crude understanding, so you have an awful lot more knowledge on this, so correct me if I'm wrong. Marxism couldn't. It's a chameleon. If it can't adapt and change by its kind of root, it will change itself. It will adapt to fit into whatever society it's living in. And Marxism changed a couple of times during the Second World War and in Europe, and then a lot of those people were brought to the States. Very learned men, you know, they wanted them in the space programs, they wanted them in the universities, etc., etc. And that Marxism basically crossed the Atlantic into America, jumped onto affirmative action in America, which was the civil rights movement, infiltrated that, and basically the universities have pretty much been lost since then. And then that cultural Marxism, as I call it, then permeated back into Europe from the States. It was drip, drip, drip for 70s, 80s, 90s, but as soon as the concept of, you know, internet came, globalization came and stuff like that, it just ramped up. And it's just literally what used to take maybe 5 to 10 years, a concept in the States to actually hit sleepy old Ireland. It's now about 6 months. Is that it's crude explanation, but is it fair? Have I any massive mistakes there, or am I missing a piece of the puzzle? Or
well, I think actually one of first of all, one of the things you said at the start was absolutely spot on. And this, I'm trying to pump this idea into people's heads. This thing's a chameleon and it's highly adaptable, and it's mutated a lot since the 1800s, when it was about, you know, as far back as the French Revolution, but then later with Marx and Engels, it was about the rich against the poor, you know, class struggle, bourgeoisie and proletariat. Then it was the feminist movement in the 20th century. It evolved. But there's been loads of different points where it's split into different factions and mutated into different strains. I mean, the Fabian Society was established in 1884, and they had a different idea to Marx. It wasn't about the rich against the poor, but they still wanted the communist revolution. You had Lenin came along later in 1917 with the Bolshevik Revolution and so on. He thought, well, we need revolution, but you need a bunch of Marxists pushing the whole thing for it to work. You had Antonio Gramsci came along later, the Italian Marxist, who talked about colonizing the superstructure, you know, getting involved with the institutions of society and turning it Marxist. There's been all these different points in history where another nut job came along with another crazy idea, and that's split into different factions. So it usually goes back, in terms of your chronology, it goes back a lot further than that, you know, in general to the 1800s, and it starts splitting into different groups. America, there's so many different sides to this, but America was contaminated in the late 1800s through the labor union movement and the socialist parties. And then you had, so the 1920s was a key time, because that was when the Bolsheviks set up the Comintern in 1919. It was the Third Communist International. And that was when things really took a turn for the worse, because the communists became professional subverters. You know, in the 1920s, the communists were in America calling people fascists and right-wing extremists because they didn't agree with Marxism. So this thing goes right back into history. And you're right, though, in that it's become more obvious as the decades have rolled on, for sure. And you mentioned the Frankfurt School as well, the Marxists who went to the Columbia University, Herbert Marcuse in particular. He actually mentioned that, he said it himself, what you were talking about, that the Marxists realized that the workers in the 20th century had a better quality of life. So they didn't really, it was hard to convince them to have a Marxist revolution. So they needed to find new oppressed groups. And that's where we have cultural Marxism and woke. You know, the oppressed class is not the poor anymore. It's black people, it's gay people, it's women, it's whoever, however they can push the revolution forward, pretty much.
what is the end goal of the current iteration of Marxism?
Yeah, see, the thing is, because this is an ideology, I talk about it like it's an entity unto itself, because whether we're talking about a purple-haired lesbian on the streets in Melbourne talking about trans rights, or we're talking about a soldier in the People's Liberation Army in China, or Maduro in Venezuela, or Paul Murphy, you know, whoever it is, they're all part of the same cult. in different ways. It's all about global revolution. And I think that usually the more extreme factions start to take over and rise to the top. So to sum up, or to answer your question, they're looking for world domination. They always have been. They believe that their revolution or their ideology is the best. They believe that the class struggle thing is important to focus on, because they believe that they can create a better world, the sort of utopia where there's no more suffering. And they say the reason why there's so much suffering is because we have hierarchies, right? Someone's the oppressed, someone's the oppressor. The oppressor is in a higher class, the oppressed is a lower class. So their solution is to remove the hierarchies. That's why they want to get rid of races. That's why they want to get rid of rich and poor, black and white, straight and gay. They want to get rid of genders with the trans movement. They always want to go after hierarchies because they want to create a world collective where there's no more countries, no more borders, no more races, no more genders, and we're all just happy comrades. That's why in the schools, you hear people like Jana London talking about in the schools, they're brainwashing the kids with the global citizen idea. They want us all to be happy comrades. And as Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum says, you will own nothing and be happy. We're all going to be happy comrades in the world collective. That's what they're looking for, essentially, world domination.
So my logical brain is telling me that, first of all, so this has been tried numerous times in history, and for the most part, it's ended in starvation, death, gulags, and a ruling class that are more akin to royalty than they are to the common man. So the example is there that communism doesn't work because we're greedy. As humans, we're just greedy, and people are attracted to power, and people want to be in positions of power. And not everybody is the same. Not everybody wants to live the hippy dippy life and kumbaya, and we'll all have the same amount and live in the same house, and nobody will want anything. Humans want. We're clever monkeys with thumbs that like to hoard things. So from a logical point of view, it can never work. Yet there is huge amounts of the population that's subscribed to this ideology that has proven not to work. Is that the brainwashing, or is it because these people don't have Marxism is the exact opposite of what organized religion will be, and for the most part, I don't think there's any communist Marxist country that ever embraced religion. It was basically destroy that. That is the system of control that we need to get rid of. Is it because these people have no faith and don't believe in anything bigger than themselves that they will succumb to this? They've just found a new cow to worship, essentially.
Yeah, that's one of the best, I have to say, it's one of the best questions I've ever been asked. And it cuts right to the heart of this. How can they subscribe to something that's so, despite its resume of death and destruction, it just causes chaos everywhere it goes? I think because ego is a big part of it. People thinking that they will be the special ones to make this succeed, despite all the people before them who made it failed. Make it fail. I mentioned Herbert Marcuse earlier. A stubborn Marxist in the Frankfurt School. He said it himself about modifying Marxism and needed to adapt. And as I point out in my work and in the book as well, and the presentation as well on my X profile, I mentioned that they do the damage because it's in the trying. You're trying to bring us towards utopia is where the damage is done. So it's like a mirage on the horizon. When you're in the desert and you need a drink of water, you've been walking for a few days or whatever, it's just out of reach. Utopia is just out of reach. And they are so persistent with this because of to answer your question, they're brainwashed to think that it just hasn't been tried in the right way, but it can succeed. And that's where they keep trying. And the damage is done in their trying.
There's an interesting quote in a movie, The Matrix. It's a fantastic movie. I'm a bit of a nerd in sci-fi stuff and things like that. But the villain of the piece, the Agent Smith, is talking to Lawrence Fishburne, who's tied in a chair, and he's explaining The Matrix. And there's this wonderful line where he says, "We made it perfect. We made utopia, and you kept waking up because humans couldn't accept it." We're not supposed to have utopia. If life got too easy, we would stop innovating.
Yes.
We will stop inventing. We will stop building. It's the one thing that my biggest criticism of the left-leaning person. I'm going with a very, very broad swipe here. They don't have the same ability to create. In fact, I would say that their ability to destroy is 10 times what their ability to create is. They're very good at tearing things down,
Yes.
but they can't build. Um, if I bring things back to the cave sometimes, and I'm quite chauvinistic at times in relation to my views on, you know what I mean, what the role of man and woman should be. We're very very different creatures, and my job is to make fire, protect the cave, and bring home the food. These are the people that, if you bring it back to them, that wouldn't have survived. They would have been the weaklings that would have been outcast from society. And I know I like to boil things down to very, very, very simple points to make it easy to understand. They're weak physically for the most part. They're weak mentally for the most part. There's a book, I can't for the life of me remember the name of it, but somebody introduced it to me, that basically says what's happening now. This is an evolutionary trend to eliminate, we'll say, woke and gender ideology and all this kind of stuff, is that humanity needs to cut a bit of chaff. And because these people, for the most part, won't reproduce much, and it's true, they won't have kids, they won't get married, they're into their gender stuff, they're into their save the planet stuff, all this kind of thing, that in 50 to 80 years, they're not going to exist anymore. We'll still be here, and we'll have our own problems, but for the most part, they won't exist. It's an interesting theory. I just like to hear your thoughts on it. We talked about systems. Sorry, and I do believe systems are alive. Like people often say the market is alive. It truly is. It's its own little entity, and with the advance of AI, etc., and stuff like that, there are systems that they operate by themselves. You take the people out of it, the system keeps operating. You know what I mean? You can interchange all the pieces, and the system won't stop. Deep states operate like that. It doesn't matter who's president or who's in charge. The deep state will still always operate in the background. And people need to realize Ireland has one as well. It's not very sophisticated or advanced in global terms, but it still exists. It's called the civil service. So just in relation to that this is a correction. This is an evolutionary correction that we have to go through this period to basically just get rid of some weaker members of the species, so to speak.
Yeah, well, the whole thing of there's a really disturbing side to this internationalist revolutionary movement. Marxism is a pretty good name for it. Is of eugenics, and a lot of them have talked about that, even going back as far back as George Bernard Shaw. I mentioned the Fabian Society, where they believe in this idea of like a socialist man. They believe in the idea of creating a society where all the individuals want to go along and be part of this big collective, as I mentioned earlier, like what they're trying to do in China with the social credit system. But they've been really interested in this idea of creating a society where people are willing to go along, a la, Eric Blair, aka George Orwell, 1984, talking about that sort of thing, and everyone's loyal to the party and so on. But as you might mention there, it's interesting that it can cause eugenics effect to people involved with the movement. And this is why we should be concerned about this when it comes to nationalism, because this ideology is permeated through society. When it comes to birth rates, feminism has been one of the main wrecking balls to destroy the family unit and lower the birth rate and so on. But it's not the only thing. And we look at trans as well as come in. That creates sterility, destroys young men and women, destroys their bodies, destroys them hormonally. So people who are participating in leftism or Marxist activism, they are taking themselves out of the reproductive cycle. But it's not confined to just them, because Marxism, again, is a slippery customer. Even people on the political right can be contaminated with Marxist thinking. I mean, I myself, studying this for a few years, I've dealt with plenty of people on the political right who subscribe to some of the parts of the brainwashing. Feminism is quite widespread. It's not just on the political left. So this thing causes havoc right across society. And of course, if we're nationalists, we should be concerned not just about our borders, but the birth rates and so on. That's the future of our people is connected in with the family unit and so on.
Feminism, one of my favorite topics that I love getting heat over.
Which proves my point.
Is it a Marxist construct? I always go back to a CIA document that was. It's a few years back now that was released. Every 50 or 80 years, whatever, they have to release certain amount of documents. And I came across something that basically was saying that the concept of feminism was a deep state construct, and it had two it was a twofold approach. One was economical, and the other one was what you're saying, the ability to kind of control or destroy the family unit. But the biggest thing was to turn the housewife into a worker bee, essentially. You know what I mean? That they would be part of the production cycle. So is this, and again, because I time is limited, I don't dig much further back behind that. I know you're going back to the 1920s and even before that. You know, you've got your suffragette movements, etc., and stuff like that. But I always look for, when can I pinpoint something was weaponized, as opposed to being kind of a grassroots movement, whether it be from the left or from the right. You know what I mean? You can normally trace these things back to an organic, well, you'd hope anyway, but who knows with the way we're finding out about history and how it can sometimes be rewritten, or, you know, the victor writes the story. Feminism, women's rights should be the same as men's rights, but the concept of feminism is an extremely dangerous ideology. What are your thoughts on that? And I'm just making statements and asking for your opinion.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've highlighted it for years as being one of the most toxic forms of Marxism, because when you think of it, there is no more universal divide in society across the world than between male and female. And with Marxist brainwashing, how it works, it puts one person in the oppressed class, one person in the oppressor class. It generates tension and hatred between them. And it's a very distorted perception of reality, because obviously the idea that men have oppressed women, mistreated women in the past is a bit of a distortion of the facts, where Marxists like to do, because it ignores all the positive things that men do for women and exaggerates all the negative things. And it's gathered legs. It started out as one thing in the 1800s, and then it went through different waves, and now it's full-on misandry or hatred for men. But one of the reasons why it's so destructive is that it's tapped into the ego and the hedonism of females, and told them that happiness is in chasing your career, traveling the world, being a strong, independent woman, etc., etc., anything at all except settling down and having kids, which a lot of women tell us is the thing that makes them the most happy anyway. So this is really quite fascinating what's going on here. It's taps into the ego and hedonism, but in terms of where it comes from, again, it goes right back to the 1800s and in the feminist movement back then. Friedrich Engels, the co-author of the manifesto, said that in his book, I think it was called, I can't remember the name, it was 1884, but it was about how the liberation of women was, I'm paraphrasing here, the liberation of women was reliant upon getting them into the workforce so they could be empowered, and that's why the traditional family unit had to be destroyed. Yet another reason, other reasons why they wanted to destroy it was to get rid of the notion of private property, of course, because they're against the bourgeoisie. But anyway, to circle back, feminism is highly destructive, and I consider this a type of a pandemic, and it's a type of brainwashing that can exist all across the Overton window. So as you said it there, you'll get heat for bringing this up. And the reason we're getting heat is because you're dealing with people who don't understand it, or they're brainwashed themselves. And it is a global problem, and it leads to extreme issues like extreme narcissism in females and so on. And again, for the viewers, I'm not saying women are to blame for this. Men and women have a role in creating this problem. We're talking specifically about one aspect of Marxism that's tailor-made for women, and it's highly destructive, and it needs to be talked about. And that's why, Martin, I do appreciate politics, current affairs, activism and nationalist movement and so on and so forth, but we have to talk about the cultural stuff and the indoctrination stuff too.
So you mentioned politics there. So your stance on so yeah, I'm going to go back to the start, because there's a lot of people out there saying it's too late, politics won't work, can't work, we have to come up with something else. And I would be involved with organizations that work on that vein and would be aligned to organizations that work along that vein. Let's build our own system outside of the system. Do you think that that infiltrating the system, so to speak, to try and change it from the inside is a waste of time, or is it a valiant pursuit that should be pursued to make change?
It's a great question. I've thought about this a lot, because I think we're very similar. Well, I want to focus on what's practical and useful. I don't agree with the idea of having protests and speeches constantly if it doesn't produce results. I don't care if 50,000 people turn up at the Customs House or O'Connell Street. What does that translate into? It has to translate into something that's impactful. Otherwise, you're just talking into the ether, you know. So I was always open to a political solution or another kind of solution. But I think even before we get to that, I mean, I do agree the system is so rigged. We know that they will cheat. We know that they will do anything to make it impossible for nationalists to get into the Dáil. And it hasn't really happened yet. No nationalist group has gotten in there. And it may never happen unless certain conditions are met, I think. So I think that the key, if we're going to get out of this mess, we have to develop a strong, powerful movement that has a reasonable amount of unity, because the population in Ireland is so small. The political right is a fraction of that. That itself is divided into smaller groups with different ideas about what the solution is. You mentioned the National Socialist movement earlier, for example. And so you need a powerful movement, I think, to affect change. And then maybe, you know, which way do we go with the political or non-political, I think kind of comes after that. That's where I'm looking at this from.
Yeah. Why do you think that, so I have theories on why nationalism as a whole is so fractured. So we can go back to the kind of the start, you know what I mean? There was no real need for very, very right-leaning parties, we'll say, for the most of this country, because okay, look, the country's gone through some recessions, one depression, you know, but for the most part, we were fairly self-sufficient, because we were fairly simple people. A lot of agriculture, a lot of sustainable living. You know, times were tight, but when times were tight, we were way nicer and we helped each other out. I believe we're a better people when we're under pressure. Country got a bit of money, foreign direct investment started, etc., etc., etc. What you'd accept as the usual small little bit of, you know, the haughty era, brown envelopes and a few nice shirts and whining and dining fancy ladies. That small amount of corruption that you just kind of accept, you know, a bit of Gambinism, you know what I mean, turned into out and out just fucking criminal fraud. There's no other way to describe it. The politicians are fraudulent in their offers to the public. They speak out of both sides of their mouth. There is money changing hands between organized crime, between politicians, between civil servants. There is a complete disregard for the constitution, complete disregard for laws, etc., etc., etc. And, you know, they're a power unto themselves. And the amount of scandals just in the last 5 years would have collapsed every successive government up to about, you could say, maybe 2000, maybe 2005. Now we have an untouchable political elite class that cannot be held accountable, protected by EU interests and global interests. You can see they all get cushy jobs. They all leave politics and go on to something very, very, very big. You know, these people are school teachers, and they were local activists, and they were this, that, and the other. There's some bright people in there, but for the most part, they're bang average citizens who just happen to have some good connections locally with the GA or this, that, and the other, or like I said, a school or something like that, and they were able to weasel their way up the ladder to TD status. How, as a people, did we allow that? It's almost an Americanized style of politics. How did we allow that enter the country? I know journalism was bought off, so the stories aren't getting out there, so to speak, and the scandals aren't getting out there. And then there's information overload because there's just too much information and too much scandal, and people can't take it all in. But as a people, how and why did we allow that to happen?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? And I often say that, you know, this globalist agenda, or whatever people want to call it, internationalism, open borders, anti-patriotism, anti-nationalism, whatever they want to call it, didn't just fall out of the sky recently. It's been kind of building over the years, and corruption is obviously tied in with that as well. And we were all going through our lives not realizing that, you know, the walls were going to eventually start closing in, you know, and it's been getting progressively worse over the decades. I think that now people are more people who are capable are more passionate than ever about the direction the country is going in. You know, they want to be patriots. They want all this madness to stop, but they weren't always like that. So we're all a little bit guilty of that, I think, where we kind of got more engaged as our lives went on a little bit. So we've kind of allowed this to happen. You know, it's clear looking at the system. It's not populated with people who have a patriotic or nationalistic mindset. There's probably certain reasons why that's the case. I think that Marxism was a massive factor in that, because it tends to demonize nationalistic thinking. people start to think, you're backwards, you're just like the Nazis and so on, which is, they were left and right wing. But I think that was a key thing that demonized nationalism and denormalized it. And you can imagine being a person, imagine a genuine nationalist walking around the Dáil or whatever in the halls there, talking to people before they go in there. You can imagine them being so ostracized and so different. And I think it all boils down to ideology and mindset in the end, I think.
The nationalist movement as a whole, we touched on it there, very, very, very fractured. You had you had two main players. We'll go back to about 2015, 2016. You had Justin Barrett's National Party, and you had Herman Kelly's Irish Freedom Party. I know both men. I was involved with IFP for a brief period. Have my opinions on both. Have spoke to both at length. No real success for quite a period of time, and then COVID happened. I'd like to touch on COVID, and it definitely affected me very, very negatively in relation to my life and where my life has gone since. But it also gave an opportunity for nationalist thinking to hang on. This totalitarian state is now telling us we can't leave our house. We got a taste of what's coming in relation to this globalist agenda, that they can lock you in your house, they can tell you what to do, they can tell you you can't go to work, they can keep you away from your life, out of the pub, whatever it is you like to do. And the movement grew, and it grew fairly fast and fairly big, and a couple of other little entities popped up and stuff like that. And then the bickering started, and the fighting, and the mudslinging. And I suppose it's the old Irish adage. It's kind of, your first political party meeting, we discuss the split. Is that human nature, ego driven, or because I know what the Marxist is and their ability to infiltrate? Is it quite simply there are people across the movement that are put there for various different reasons? You have Antifa as a big organization in Ireland. Don't think they're not. You have government sponsors. You'll have An Garda Síochána. You'll have Special Branch. You'll have a lot of fingers potentially in the pie. The question I'm asking, the splits and the stone throwing and the fighting, is it natural, or is it outside interference stopping growth of nationalism?
That's a brilliant question, Martin, and I've thought about this a lot. I actually think that when people understand Marxism, understand how good it is at derailing nationalist movements, it's been doing this since the 1800s. And like I said, professionally driven by a whole nation since the 1920s, it's quite a beast. But the thing is, the nationalist movement in Ireland, I think, tends to divide itself quite a lot too. We have tendencies to do that. I think the lefties don't even have to use their whole bag of tricks.
As a matter of fact, I know this as fact. Yep.
Yeah, they have plenty of tactics, and that's why I've been saying, if people aren't going to learn about Marxism, you're not going to stand a chance, because they're just going to get in there. They'll start rumors and dramas between people. He said this, she said that. Oh, did they? Yeah, well, fuck them. They record your response, send it to someone else, all that shit. So, and you're on the ground more than I am. The political figures can attest to all this stuff. So I think it's probably a combination of both. But something I want to talk about with Irish people in particular, and I know this because I've spent probably half my adult life abroad at this stage, is that obviously I'm Irish. I love being Irish. I'm very proud to be Irish. But I do have some criticisms of Irish people as well. They might apply to other countries. I don't really know, but they definitely apply to Irish people. We can be tendencies towards drama, cynicism, suspicion, and so on. And
crabs in the bucket.
Yeah, and that's terrible. When you're trying to build a movement, you need positive energy, positive attitude to work together and to try and find common ground with a universal ideological base, ideally. Now, I actually, Martin, the craziest, most insulting, patronizing, critical people I've dealt with over the last few years is not the lefties, because I'm like kryptonite to those fuckers. They know just take them apart, because I'm just like like a mental patient having an argument with the doctor in the asylum, right? They won't bother coming near me. But Some of them do, but it's the people on the political right who've had a problem with me. And these people call themselves nationalists, particularly people in I call them the Jew trappers, people obsessed with the Jews. They think they're behind everything, or the National Socialist camp. They tend to join in. They tend to be the worst, and it's a contradiction because they say they want freedom and they want to succeed, but here they are shooting somebody like myself who is actually making a strong contribution. So, I'd say it's a little bit of both, and the lefties have a lot more, many more tricks they could use, put it that way.
I'll agree with you. So Antifa members financially hurt me in relation to employment and stuff like that, but I've never had a direct threat from them. Nationalists, my phone is full of voice notes. I'm in groups where my address, which is funny, where I don't live, because it doesn't tell you how poor they are at their intel. That yeah, my address has been shared. Oh, we're going to get this guy. This is his address. Yeah, we'll get him whatever morning. Yeah. This kind of, they don't even know that you don't live there anymore. Nasty. It goes back to the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's these people on Mount Stupid, as I like to, as in, they just think, and it's not just National Socialists. This is all across nationalism. There's an issue with drugs and nationalism as well. I don't mind saying it. I'm very and staunchly anti-drugs. There's an issue with drugs in nationalism. Any movement that starts, you're going to get people who will see an opportunity. There's a whole new clientele for me, and look, it exists. It exists. There's no point saying it doesn't. We have to confront these things. So again, I'm staunchly anti-drugs. If I was in politics, I would basically implement it's written already. It's called a grow your own policy. If you want to smoke weed, that's fine. You grow your own. If you sell it, we're giving you 10 years in prison, and that's it. You can invite 3 or 4 friends around, and fucking same as having a few beers, smoke a few joints, and have your laugh and watch football or whatever. But nobody can profit in this country or outside of this country from, like, people don't. Cocaine is a huge problem. We might segue for a little bit and maybe talk about some other societal issues. Cocaine is a huge problem. Drug dealers are smart people. They're businessmen. They're very, very good at what to do, and they identified COVID as an excellent opportunity to expand the business, so to speak, and got basically all these kids who couldn't go out, and it's people in their 40s as well that couldn't go out and were stuck at home and stuff like that, have coke parties at home, and this just happened. When the restrictions were lifted, those coke parties came to the pubs, and the publicans they were delighted to get the customers back, get the business back open. There was a lot of turning blind eyes to it, and now it is so extreme that I live very rural, but there's a couple of local pubs I frequent. It's so common that I got into a conversation with 3 painters who were finished working on a Saturday, having a quiet pint. Sorry, it was actually Sunday they were working. And I got invited to the bathroom to have a bump, as they say. And I was kind of looking at them, and I was kind of going, all right, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. We won't name any names. And I said, how much does that cost? And he said, 150 euros. And I said, how long will that last you? Probably about 2 days. I said, and you're doing that every day? And he went, yeah. And he was there. So you're spending your entire wages on coke? And he went, oh, pretty. I said, where do you live? Oh, I live at home. And this guy was in his 30s and has a girlfriend, and he wants to get married and all this kind of stuff. And I was there like, do you not see you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot? And then I saw shame, and there was 2 older gentlemen with him who were late 40s, early 50s, who were also taking their little bump in the bathroom. And I could see the shame in their face then. They were getting embarrassed because they realized that although everybody's doing it and everybody's in their circle doing it, it's not normal. It's not right. It's not, you know what I mean? Coke used to be a rich person's drug, you know what I mean? And it just, I don't know. It's the same as drinking too much. I love drink. There's a great quote from John B. Keane where he talks about no man was ever born with the love of liquor as myself. Well, I'm right down his laneway, but I have a terrible fear of it also, and a terrible respect for it. So I don't drink a lot. I'll have 4 pints and then I'm done, because I know if you drink more than that, you're going to be out for the night, and you mightn't get up for work in the morning, etc., etc., etc. So I drink in just over moderation. But like I said, there's a healthy fear and respect for it, and knowledge that it will destroy you if you let it take hold for any reason. Drugs, that has happened. People are destroying themselves. Do you think that is by design, or is it just unfortunate circumstances, or is it part of the system to keep men weak?
Yeah, well, yeah. Actually, before I answer you, I remember going to a meeting once in Ireland last year, and an individual who I won't name stood up. It was like a meeting of nationalists, and an individual stood up at the start who was on cocaine, talking about there's a cocaine problem in Ireland, and this is at a national a nationalist
I
meeting.
know, I know the meeting, and I know the individual, but quite
Yes,
well actually. Yeah.
right. And I thought that's where we're at now. The irony. But anyway, but people can't really complain because, like, as I said, you think of what we're up against, how difficult it is to get people to work together, to have that right mindset. We talked about, a positive attitude, working together, common ground, being proactive, avoiding drama, not being subverted. We've all this stuff work to do, and yet we have this partying streak that a lot of people in Ireland are proud of, that, we're up for a laugh and doing all this. Now, a few drinks is one thing, but getting into drugs and making them part of our culture is something else. It's not natural. It's not something we should be proud of. And I think as well, nationalists, yeah, you protect your country, you protect your culture, but there's also our beautiful Irish genetics. We should be proud of our lineage and so on. Our ancestors didn't do coke. It's nothing to do with Irish culture at all. It's an import. It shouldn't exist. We shouldn't be proud of it. And ties into what we were talking about earlier, that we've all sleepwalked into this globalist trap. This didn't just fall from the sky. We're almost, the clock is ticking and we're running out of time. And part of that has been hedonism, getting out of it, being hung over half the time, being away with the fairies, being wrapped up in our personal problems, while this agenda has been working away in the background. So that's my first point. The other one, to answer the last bit of your question about, was this by design? Well, I know that it's not all about communism, but it is true that the political left tend to like drugs. They tend to talk about legalizing drugs, particularly in the States, talking about legalizing weed, cannabis. The Chinese have been accused, and there's evidence that they're pumping America with fentanyl. We look at the history of communism, they always use drug running, heroin and such, particularly in South America, but even Mao was doing it. There's definitely a correlation there between pushing drugs, weakening society, and the communist movement. And Ireland, as I talked about already, has been riddled with this stuff since the late 1800s. So there definitely is a lot going on with this, but this is definitely, as nationalists, anti-globalists, we should be frown upon stuff like that. And if people want to do that with their own lives, they should be excluded, I think, to a reasonable degree from the movement.
I agree 100%. Yeah, I absolutely agree. The work is too important, and there's too much to be done. And the other side of it is that all you're doing is you're giving ammunition to the enemy, because if a high profile nationalist, or even someone with a small profile, gets busted for whatever, it doesn't matter what it is, intoxicated in public, or making a fool of yourself, or drugs, or anything, it hurts the entire movement, and you won't be treated like an immigrant who stabbed children and have your identity hidden, and you will be front page on all of the papers, as in, this is the big bad far right. Sorry, I'm having some sun issues there, so don't mind the big white light coming to get me.
That's all right. No worries.
I'm actually just kind of looking at the time, and I'm going, where the sun, you're actually going to be able to track the time of the by how this white line gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But I'm not going to just start moving monitors or cameras or anything like that. I'm just going to have to invest in a little blind.
Yeah,
just the way the light is reflecting off the side of the house. So we touched on politics, we touched on drugs. Let's talk about Emmet Commer back in the day, before Resolving Reality. I heard a rumor that you were in comedy. I heard a rumor that you used to voice acting and stuff like that as well. Is it true, or is it?
yeah. Well, yeah, the rumors about me being a coke baron are a lie, but the ones
I didn't hear that
one that's one from me. I'm a secret coke dealer. No, yeah, no, it's true. I when I was in my early 20s in Ireland, I kind of I was a little bit bored. I was losing a bit of direction, and I took up I wanted a hobby, and I was interested in acting, because it sounds funny now, but I felt I had a bit of a confidence problem ish, and I wanted to do something about it. I was fascinated by acting, and I did 2 years part-time in Dublin. Then, as usual with me, I became a bit obsessive about trying to be the best at it, and I went to London and did a year of drama school there. This is a long time ago now. I'll try not to give away the exact chronology. But then after I did drama school, we did a stand-up as part of our drama course. They said all of us had to do it because actors are afraid of stand-up because you're naked on stage. It's just you and the mic and your material, unless you're playing a character. So a lot of actors are afraid of doing it. So they pushed us to do it. And we were all supposed to do 5 minutes in front of the class. And everyone thought, well, he's probably going to be good at this. So I said, I'll go last, being the cocky bastard I was. I went on the last week. So it was 2 of us went per week every Friday. We're supposed to do 5 minutes. I was up the night before writing pages and pages of gibberish and so on and impressions. And I ended up doing like 40 minutes. Most of it was rubbish, obviously. But when I started doing impressions of the teachers and my classmates, it went down really well. And I ended up doing this a talent show. The piano teacher knew someone running a talent show. I kind of did that, and then it took off from there. So I did stand up for about 10 years on and off in London and then Australia when I lived there for a while. And it's not for everybody. It's the highest highs and the lowest lows. But I learned a lot from it, and it certainly made me. Once you can handle, it's great having a few hundred people in the palm of your hand thinking you're amazing, coming off stage and you're the man and all that. But the nights where it goes bad, when there's a big group of people who paid money and they hate you, it really toughens you up. So it was quite an interesting experience.
5 minutes. You ask anybody to talk for 5 minutes about anything, they won't be able to do it. 5 minutes to write a coherent 5 minutes. I'm a huge fan of stand-up comedy. I think Dave Chappelle is probably one of the greatest storytellers in my lifetime. I would have been a huge Eddie Murphy fan. Eddie's proper stand-up back in the 80s. Norm Macdonald. I love comedy. Some I don't like, and some is very good. Leftists can't do comedy at all. It's amazing. But to say that you went for 40 minutes, it doesn't matter whether it was good or gibberish. To actually be able to write 40 minutes material that's very impressive. You know what I mean? As a kind of a subject, it's an amazing ability. I've dabbled with writing stuff. I'll probably get drunk some night and go up and do a thing in a pub or something like that. You know what I mean? There's a place near me that does stand-up comedy and stuff like that. Just to try it out, to see. But but like I said, my humor is extremely dark. It's just it's I go to bad places, but it's like I said, it's funny in my head, and if you've got the morbid sense of humor that I have, you get it. Most people would be horrified and shocked and said, one of the biggest things in my life as a rule is I get this said to me so often. I can't believe you just said that out loud. It's just it's just part and parcel of my makeup. So, by the way, you're going to get, because you mentioned acting and comedy and stuff like that, you're going to get all the people coming after you saying you're a paid stage shill now and all this kind of stuff.
Of course.
As you do. A good colleague of mine has he had an extra profile, that where you can be the extras for movies and stuff like that. You just send in a headshot and whatever, and you don't actually do anything with it or something like that. And that gets thrown back at him all the time. You know what I mean?
I know the one you mean. Yeah. I understand.
So
it's typical.
It's very funny, but entertainment is, and it's important to have these conversations, because as well as doing what you do and doing what I do, we also have to have lives, and we have to have joy in our lives.
Yes,
you have to have something else. And like, I've done interviews where I talked about sci-fi. There was no politics in it. You know what I mean? It was basically a guy I know, Noel, who does his own show, and he's big into sci-fi, and I would have been big into sci-fi and stuff like that. We just had a conversation about that, about movies and stuff like that. And it's important that we live our lives as well as do whatever activism that we're involved in, or whatever we feel it is that we're doing or trying to achieve. So, what does I'm not going to get into too much into your personal life, but what are, outside of what you're pursuing in relation to awakening people to the dangers of Marxism, communism, etc., and helping people understand so they can form better opinions, what's outside of that?
Oh yeah, well, it's a great subject because a few things you mentioned there before I answer that. The stand-up industry has become contaminated with woke. as well. One of the reasons why I stopped doing it, because a lot of the acts were kind of, drifting into political stuff. And I'll tell you a very quick story. I went to see some stand up in near Leicester Square in London a few years ago with some pals. And I kid you not, well, the MC was a black lesbian, black power MC, surprise, surprise. And the first two acts were two guys, both of them were talking about sticking things up their arses. They both had the same material, but they're different acts in the same night. And I almost walked out, and I paid £20 for that. So that's what's become with stand-up. But the rest of stuff, what you were saying, so important that people, who take it easy sometimes and have pressure release valves in their lives, and they don't wake up every day worrying about the new world order and globalism and saving their countries, because you just end up with burnout. You end up anxious and miserable. You actually affects your skill, I think, because I used to be like that. I used to worry, am I doing enough? Am I fighting the system enough every day? And now I find I'm a bit more chilled. I'm much more mature, much more knowledgeable, and I've much more use now. I think I'm much more helpful because I don't take it as seriously in so many ways. At least, I'm in control of my emotions a bit better nowadays. But in terms of what I do at the moment, all I do is just work. And in my free time, I'm doing this. I'm not really interested in doing anything else. I changed country again. I'm in the UK at the moment, but I changed country a few months ago. So I was kind of getting set up. But this is the first time I've had like a home studio set up now with all the monitors and lights and decent camera and stuff. So, that's all I'm interested in doing for the moment, really.
Very good, very good. And I have to say, you get some very interesting guests. I would follow you, but look, time is important, so I can't. It's a case of I find it very difficult to commit to, we'll say, a lot of podcasts. I'll try and do one a week, but it'll be somebody different every week. So, but I do watch your snippets and stuff like that. They come up on X. Like I said, the Jew Trapper one I was just there. I call it the Jew hole, but it's the same bloody thing. It's very good. And when you kind of see somebody that kind of going, this is somebody I think who gets it.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean, it's about learning, and I do this because, number one, I enjoy it. I enjoy talking to people. It's a nice format to do it. Number two, I'm all about learning, and I have to talk to people who have different opinions and different ideas and are more knowledgeable, because I find this the easiest way for me to take in information. A lot of stuff that you've said to me today will stay in my head. If I read it in a book, it won't stay in my head, if you know what I mean.
Right.
I just lose it. We all just learn different ways. So I learn through listening and through conversation. So it's very, very enjoyable. But the Resolving Reality show, talk to me about the concept, when it started, how you started, what the first couple of episodes were like, kind of, and how it built, we'll say, because it's pretty impressive followership now. It's and like I said, some of your guests are they're excellent. You know what I mean? They're world-renowned scholars and professors, and you do speak to kind of very, very high-profile colleagues. So somebody who's kind of just starting out, so to speak, on this path. Tell me about your setup and how it started. And
yeah, so I was actually, Martin, about 2012 when I was in Australia. I was working on a farm when I was doing stand-up and stuff. My second run doing it when I was near Perth. I was on a farm an hour and a half north of Perth. So I was being a bit more isolated than usual, shall we say, after the bright lights of London. I had a lot of time on my hands. I was doing 8 hours a day on an olive grove, and we had blueberries as well. So working with machinery, power tools, pruning olive trees and stuff. But I was on my own a lot with just me and the doggy. And I had this little 4 gigabyte iPod Nano that I used to bring to work and listen to podcasts every day. And one of my favorites was Red Ice Radio, which later turned into Red Ice TV. And that was a massive influence on me. And I thought I would love to do podcasts because, like you were talking about learning, I learned a lot of my knowledge from that. I've gobbled up a lot of books, but it was mostly listening to hours and hours of podcasts. So that inspired me to do my own podcast. I did kind of half of a media course in Dublin years ago, and then I started that podcast 2018, Resolving Reality, and it was all about the issues affecting Ireland and other Western countries. And it was about, all of my first interview was about feminism. Then there was one about the climate change movement, trans ideology, all the usual kind of talking points. And that actually led to me going towards doing the book then, because I thought, I realized years later, a little bit later, that a lot of the stuff I was talking about was just they're all Marxist activism. That's all it was. All these different agendas were tied back into that. It's why
Just plug the name of the book there, and is it available where you can get it?
Oh yeah, sorry. So the book's title is Red Pandemic: The Global Marxist Cult. And if people go to my website, resolvingor.com, so the letter R for Romeo, resolvingor.com, the link's on my X profile at resolvingor. And there's a page on the website dedicated to the book, but it's available on Amazon UK, amazon.com, depending on where people are. Omnia Veritas is the publisher, so people can buy directly from the publisher as well. But I always say, again, we were talking about books. A lot of people are so busy nowadays, maybe a 600-page book is a bit too much of a commitment. It's more of a reference manual for this cult movement. But the presentation, my pinned tweet on X is really a great introduction. It's my presentation I did in Dallas 2004. It's only like 45 minutes, and that gives an overview of the subject. But so with the podcast, like I decided to go back to that again, and the caliber of guests. Yeah, I always thought, like yourself, I want to speak to specialists. Like I had Jeff Nyquist on, who was, he was a specialist at communism and focuses on the history, the geopolitical stuff, and so on. And even I can learn a lot from someone like him. I focus more on the brainwashing, so I tried to have specialists on. Off the top of my head, back in 2018, I interviewed Dr. Bill Warner, who's a specialist at radical Islam, and so on. So I think if you're going to have a guest on about a subject, you might as well go with the best quality you can manage pretty much.
Islam, you mentioned. So clear and present dangers. I personally believe Islam is more of a threat to me in the short term than Marxism is in the short term. Marxism has been there for such a long time. It's going to be a very, very long time to undo it. Islam is coming fast. I'll tell you an anecdotal story of I'm friends with everybody. People throw out the terms racist and bigot and all this kind of stuff. I'm tribalist. That's what I am. My people come first. That's the term I use to describe myself. I bear no ill will towards any other people as long as you bear me no ill will. If you bear me ill will, you're going to get it back in spades. I have a hierarchy of basically my family, my close community, the rest of my Irish brothers and sisters, Indigenous Irish brothers and sisters, Christian-based peoples, my European brothers and sisters that are the same skin color as me, then the rest of the world in relation to if you're Christian and you follow the same moral compass as me, and then everybody else. And that's it. I'm neither ashamed nor embarrassed of that idea, of my ideology. Ideology is the wrong word. I must stop using that word because ideology means that you believe in you can't change. My opinion changes all the time. That is my current belief system and my hierarchy of importance in relation to my duty of care, so to speak. So it's very easy for me to say I don't care about African immigrants. I don't care about Muslim immigrants because I know that there's nearly 20,000 people that don't have a home, that are couch surfing, that are whatever, you know what I mean? That are not being looked after in relation to our social contract.
Yes.
That's my priority. So I've ranted there now, and I've actually lost my train of thought. There was a question. Yeah, Islam. Yeah. So I do not like Islam. That this Muslim friend of mine said that when the extremists come, I bear you no ill will, but I will turn my back because that's my team. I won't partake in it, but I'll have to turn my back because that's my team. So I don't know, are people aware of that, or is there enough fear? Am I over exaggerating? Is it a case that it's not a danger, or what would your thoughts on it be?
Oh, Islam's been a threat since the 7th century. The Islamic calendar starts in 622 AD, which was the first migration from Mecca to Medina. And Muhammad was, in the beginning, for the first 13 years of his life, he preached Islam, but he didn't really get many results. He got like 130 followers over 10 years or whatever. But then after that, when he started going political and talking about jihad, then the numbers started to grow. And jihad is the Arabic word for effort. It doesn't necessarily mean warfare. So it can be war, it can be political, economic, and so on. So it's been a threat since the 7th century, and it has been gathering pace. And I can understand how you're looking at this, that it seems to be more of a clear and present danger than Marxism. Because obviously, if you compare, say, a lefty at a protest in Ireland, surrounded by the guards at the GPO, and there's more nationalists, they don't seem that scary. And then you have, say, a machete wielding Muslim guy on the bridge, London Bridge or whatever, kicking off. Stuff like that makes us think Islam's more dangerous, and certainly it is. It's dangerous from a term of violence, terrorist attacks, using a car as a weapon, but also the demographics as well. Muslims, even though they have an alliance with communism and they work together, they're not affected by woke. The women are baby factories. They outbreed Western women. So they are certainly clear and present danger. But I have to point out, though, Islam wouldn't be a problem for the West if it wasn't for the damage that Marxism has done, making us internationalists, breaking down the borders, talking about multicultural diversity, attacking the church, and all this nonsense. Look at how the lefties helped the Muslims get into Croke Park, to do their prayer and stuff like that. If it wasn't for Marxism, from what I can see it, Islam would be confined to the Middle East. You would still have Muslims in Western countries, but it wouldn't be like it is now. We know that they're working together, and we see what's happening in the UK. You look at Keir Starmer, who's a Fabian socialist, and particularly the rest of the lefties in the UK have helped the Muslims develop and become this problem. And like I always say as well, I said last night in the space or whatever, that nature abhors a vacuum. So the West getting weaker has created this vacuum of power. Not just culturally, but socially, and we're all divided and confused because of what Marxism has done. And Islam just does what it does; it just tends to spread. The Islamic migration is called hijra. It's the Islamic calendar is based on the concept of hijra. So of course they're going to spread and be a problem. And it's just another one of the effects of the impact of this globalist agenda on Western countries.
You mentioned Keir Starmer. So look, I know his background. I know what he is. Morgan McSweeney has come into the public light. Have you heard anything about him, or do you know who he is? Just have a little look into him. Morgan McSweeney, Cork-based man, very, very, very powerful in the Labour Party. I think his dad is an accounting firm or a senior partner in an accounting firm in Cork. And if anybody has any information on that, just send it to me, because I'm doing some research into how a Cork Irishman became the most powerful force in the Labour Party. He's in a bit of trouble for appointing people with Epstein links, but anyway, it's for another day. I'm throwing that out there because I'm doing some digging myself on this guy and his family, because he may have that family may be bigger and more important in Ireland than we think, and there may be some relatives that are actually working in senior roles in the Irish government as well. So watch this space, as they say. We've touched on a lot of subjects. We've talked about Marxism. We've talked about National Socialism. We've talked about, we'll say, the political setup in Ireland. We've talked about, you're in the UK now, right? They're way further down the path than we are in relation to, like, I would say that the majority of the cities in the UK are lost, and they're never getting them back due to demographic change. On top of that, then, politicians came out and said the countryside is too white. We had this is in the UK now. You also had the Scottish First Minister. I'm not sure what the exact total is, going back a couple of years, going, civil service too white, this too white, that too white, this too white. There is
Polanyi, wasn't it? He used to Polanyi, I think.
I can't remember his name. It was small little rat-faced horrible human. But I detest these people that are anti-white, because I don't like inequality in any sense. Do you know what? You can have your Pride March, you can have your Black Lives Matter march, you can have whatever march you want, but that means I can have my White Power March or my White Pride March. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be skinhead sausages, but if you are allowed to celebrate what you are, then I am allowed to celebrate what I am. So why can't I have my imagine if you were going to a local council saying, listen, I want to do a parade and a march that celebrates white men.
Not a chance.
But this is the inequality of it all, and the people screaming we'll say their rights are being affected and trodden on, have actually more rights than I do constitutionally. A white male has the least amount of rights in this country at the minute, because for some reason we don't seem to. We are a minority, but we're not given any of the minority status. I had an idea that we should apply to whatever powers that start with the EU. I don't like any of these organizations, but I will use the tools to further the betterment of my people. We should apply for indigenous rights the same way as the Hawaiians or the Maori or any island people. We are an island people. We were untouched for centuries, and we should have indigenous rights. And I'm reading a book on Brehon law at the minute, and it's fantastic. It's absolutely the old Irish, when we were broke up into little kingdoms and fiefdoms, and there could have been over 155 little kingdoms in Ireland, but we were of an extremely enlightened people in relation to governance, in relation to law, in relation to fairness, and in relation to penalties. It's fascinating, measured in cows, and basically there was levels of society. And you did wrong, you just paid a fine, and that was it. And if you did extremely wrong, you would be excised from the community. Sorry, can you bear with me 1 second? I'm doing a show, Ben.
You're being harassed.
Yeah, I'm getting a knock on the door there from somebody who's wants to speak to me. But no, my son is out of the country and he's just on the phone there. So, but it will. No, we'll keep going for another few minutes. He'll be on for another few minutes. I normally do about an hour and a half. Sorry for that interruption there. But
no problems. You go as long as you want. No problem at all.
Like life happens, as they say, and this is part and parcel of what I do. Is that some things like this did happen. There's issues where I did the live shows where somebody would walk past in the background, or a cat would jump in my lap, and stuff like that. It's just it adds to the. I suppose what I'm trying to do is just put genuine people out there, not polished, not edited, not any agenda and like that. It's just two human beings having a conversation about whatever. And I think it's like your show, Resolving Reality. I think we can fix an awful lot of what's gone wrong just by talking more and having conversations and finding out where we're similar. Do you ever speak to the communists or the Marxists? Have any of them ever been brave enough to come on and do a recording with you?
No, well, some of them try to. Like, there's a well-known subverter on the Irish X Spaces called David Z, and I don't know if that's his real name, but he's clearly brainwashed, and you can tell by the way that his talking points and stuff. And they'd like to try to draw me into debates, but I won't let them do it, because my job is, first of all, you can't change the mind of someone who's brainwashed. But what they usually do is they set you up so that they keep the conversation fast, so you make mistakes. They drag you into all these areas and so on. Meanwhile, people in the general public who are watching it or listening, who don't have any knowledge about the subject, they're missing out on the insights I have to offer. So I'm not going to let these brats get in the way, and I won't give them the satisfaction. So sometimes people try to get me to drag me into debates and stuff like that. I don't really see any point. Some people might say, well, if you're so right, you should be able to dismantle their arguments. No, the idea of debating ideas goes back as far as the Greeks, and maybe even further back than that. They didn't have to deal with Marxism. This thing is might as well be from another planet. It's the most intense kind of brainwashing we've ever seen. It's from the pit of hell, basically. And their opinions, people are brainwashed with this, they're not equal to mine or any other normal person. Certainly not with someone with the knowledge. So I won't really give them the satisfaction to contaminate the message,
You mentioned a character there, and I can freely talk about him because it's a pseudonym. Okay, so David Z. I actually know his real name, and I've spoke to him and phone conversations, not in the last year or two, but I have spoke to him. I know who he is. You class him as he's communist, Marxist. I know his background and stuff like that. Is that just his ideology, or is he subversive?
Well, this is it. You see, the problem with Marxism is that people can think that they're helping, and they may not be working for the Kremlin or some sort of overtly, communist group or individual that we can think of, or, Kim Jong-un or Xi Jinping or whatever, but it's in their beliefs and in their ideas that they can do a lot of damage and take people down the wrong path. So,
Mm.
we have to, again, my job is to teach people about how broad this is, that it's about indoctrination, and there's many different forms. And it's also a sliding scale. Someone can be slightly indoctrinated or heavily indoctrinated. And to use that individual as an example, they once contacted me privately to say I was an idiot. I didn't know what I was talking about. I've never lived in China and Russia, and that there was a big difference between Soviet communism, which this person approves of, and woke, as if I need to be told that. So I deal with this a lot. Particularly, seems to be middle-aged guys who've read a lot of books about socialism seem to think that they understand it better than I do. But as my work, kind of what I'm trying to push forward, is that we need a new approach to this old problem. There's no use in someone coming out with another book about Mao's China or Stalin's Russia or what the Bolsheviks did. It's the past. We need to focus on the brainwashing now, today, in the present. That's where I come in.
So, socialism versus communism. So again, I have to frame this in, at heart, I am a libertarian. I want to be left alone. I want my property that I can defend, and that's it. I want to make my own way in life, as I always have, but leave me alone. I won't mess with your system if you just, like I said, leave me alone. The state declared war on me, so unfortunately, it is what it is.
Here we are. Yeah.
So, I want a nationalist government, but I want a nationalist government that promotes the idea of personal responsibility. And again, I get shot down for this because people go, "Oh, you're going to take our social welfare, you're going to take that." I'm actually not. You have to have a safety net.
Agreed.
You have to have a certain amount of socialism, but there's a huge difference between those who can't and those who won't. And that's where I draw my line. Those who can't need socialist policies. So when I say socialism from an economic and government point of view, what are you hearing coming out of my mouth? Do you see it as, no, it's just part of the problem, or it leads to a bigger problem, or do we need a certain amount of socialism in society to have a healthy Western-based society?
It's a great point, and it's part of the tangled mess we have to deal with. So, say, when you look at the Irish economy, you couldn't call it, obviously, a laissez-faire, full-on capitalistic society, because we have the social progressive income tax, and we have the social welfare aspect to it as well. And I agree, I wouldn't, if I had the power, because I'm against all aspects of Marxism, I wouldn't, if I was running the country tomorrow, I wouldn't just remove the welfare state. That's immoral. You can't do that, But I agree also that in a better run country where people have more prospects and there's more confidence and things run a bit better, that we would probably try to wean people off being dependent on others and be more self-sufficient. And I don't think any individual who's got confidence and who's a reasonably healthy person would like to have it any other way. I'm sure most people don't like the situation they're in if they're reliant on others. Maybe some people do, but it is a bit of a tangled mess. But so the idea of socialism, as I kind of explained to people, to keep it simple, is that Marxism is the whole ideology and socialism is applying Marxist principles to how the economy is structured and how the government functions and so on. So we start to centralize power, there's more governmental controls and stuff. But as history has shown us, too much of that's a bad thing. So I suppose we should focus on what could ideally work best. It'd be great to have a nationalist government in power who acknowledges that we need to move towards a more self-sufficient Ireland, have better economic prosperity, but who lets the economic system do its thing without any negative interference, while being willing to step in under certain circumstances. But what you don't want is a bunch of lefty activists, patriots in charge of the show, who maybe use a bit of socialist principles. Arguably isn't a bad thing, but when you put a bunch of lefties in charge who believe in total socialism or democratic socialism or whatever it is, they tend to ruin the economies, because as Hayek and Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek analyzed socialism sort of the 20s onwards with different books, said there's a few reasons why socialism doesn't work when you're total socialism. I'll quickly go over them. The first one is the incentive problem. It's very hard to get people to work, to be entrepreneurial, to run businesses and so on, and contribute to the economy if there's no incentive to make money and profits. So Marxists hate profits because they think it's oppressive. So it's one of the reasons why socialism is problematic. The second one is the knowledge problem. You know, when you have a bunch of lefties who try to control a whole economy, they couldn't possibly have all the knowledge required to run all the businesses and all the infrastructure and everything else. So you end up with economic collapse as well. And the fourth one is the calculation problem. What you don't want is a bunch of lefties in charge who start artificially creating prices, you know, with no economic knowledge, or giving away things for free too much, because you end up with economic collapse again. So they're trying to help, but they end up causing an awful lot of destruction. And the history kind of proves that.
Is there any country on the planet now that you can look to and say you're actually getting the balance right?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I mean, I say some of my data about economics would be quite a while since I looked into it. So this would just be kind of speculation. But say the problem as well we have is that the lefties will use propaganda and say, look at Sweden, for example. They'll point to certain countries and say that they're, how could I forget? Sorry, the People's Republic of China. They'll say that's an economically powerful country, and they'll pull out the you know, it's run by a communist party, but it's a bit of a distortion of the facts, because the communists caught on at one stage that if you go full on commie, you've got no economy. The country collapses. You can't have a global revolution. So they started to absorb, try some capitalistic ideas of free trade, and, you know, loosen the grip on the economy and so on.
It's just the chameleon changing again. It's very interesting to watch. I was talking to a gentleman last week who was just back from China, and he said that the cities are like, he said they're actually building cities to accommodate their population growth, as in they know they're going to have. China thinks in centuries. This is the big thing that people don't understand. Most Western countries think in election cycles or decades. China has been thinking in centuries since the revolution, and they probably always did it, as a people. So they think in centuries. So they build cities and then just move the population to these brand new shiny cities, and they'll have industry outside it, etc., etc. But even in the building of the city creates, so that, I mean, there are parts of China that are akin to the Western world. It's absolutely, infrastructure is there. It's clean. It's safe. It's, as long as you stay within the within the lines, you're fine. You can actually carve out a wonderful life. Huge middle class. When you go outside of those artificially created areas,
Yes.
rural China is still poverty, uneducated people, massive deaths, starvation. But, you know, they select who gets to live in their big cities, and who gets the amenities and stuff like that. And again, look, it's a huge piece of land. So, but for the most part, it's fairly shit. Like, there's still people starving to death out there. You know what I mean? There's still mass executions out there. There's still stuff you'll never ever hear about on mainstream media. You know, but my God, they can build. That's one communist entity that I can say they can build, and they're a global power. They influence. They're there in South America. The whole, like, people talk about Trump doing this, that, and the other and stuff like that. Well, Trump was actually only reacting to what China were doing in relation to grabbing a world leader, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. It's a ballsy move. In relation to our position, I'm going to transition now, because we're talking about geopolitics. As a tiny island nation that's supposed to be neutral, if you gave me the magic stick of power, the only comment I would make as the island, the nation of Era, in relation to global geopolitics or wars, etc., is, we have a table. We will facilitate you to sit at if and when you want to start negotiating peaceful terms. And Ireland should be the bastion of negotiations, and we should be a truly neutral nation. We haven't. This government has made enemies of two nuclear powers in Russia and Israel, and I don't care what people's opinions of either country is. They're still nuclear powers with huge intelligence agencies that can hurt us physically, economically. You know what I mean? You stay out of You don't take sides as a neutral country. You go, here's our table. If you want us to facilitate your meetings, we will do it for you. What would your agree, disagree, or what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, see, it's tricky because we're talking about China there, which I regarded as the most dangerous regime in the world, and they're dying to push out. And I believe there's an alliance between Russia, China, and North Korea, who all are essentially it ties into what you're saying, but about neutrality. I'll come back to that in a second. But these countries are all, despite the smoke and mirrors and the different definitions, they're all essentially one-party communist regimes at the economic side who have got
Even Russia?
Yes, yeah. So I talked to Nyquist about this. So this is the kind of threat on the horizon. So the so-called collapse of the West and the weakening of Western countries is part of something much bigger. And I believe that all these countries are one-party states formed from communism pretty much in the 20th century. They're all aggressive. They're all nuclear powers. They're all working together to use economic and military means to grab as much land as they can across the world. So there's a few flashpoints for a bigger conflict: Ukraine, of course, Israel, Palestine, and what's happening in the South China Seas. And I think that about the neutrality thing, it's a bit complex, but I think that it'd be great for us to stay out of this. We don't have the ability to get involved in a fight, but I think we have to also accept that there is a bit of a power struggle in the world, and it's in our interests to try to not get into a fight, of course, but to try to align with Western values. That's what I think we should be doing, and have a clear line in the sand. Because we talked about the Irish movement and communist subverters and so on. You'll hear a lot of people talking pro Putin, pro Russia. China is a lot of stuff which is kind of debatable and so on. There'll be a lot of that talk going on. I think that that's quite dangerous because we're inviting in, an affinity with this communist alliance. So I don't think we should be involved in a fight, but I think we should consider ourselves a Western nation and, just try to pick that side if we have to, pretty much.
If I was to throw you a kind of a devil's advocate question, right? If I was to say to you, you have to choose one, and you've no choice, or a gun to your head, you have to hitch your band to the wagon, or whatever that expression is. Russia or the EU?
Oh, wow. Well, all right. Well, yeah. Okay, you're making me pick one here. But you see, I regard both of them as being part of the international communist movement. It's just different types, even though they're kind of seem to be at loggerheads. And this is, I know, obviously, we only have so much time or whatever, and we don't want to be overloading the audience.
We can do it, but we can have do you know what? Stick a pin in that one. Come back on sometime. We'll have a conversation on that one, because I think we're in for a bumpy ride this year in relation to where the EU is economically, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, we'll stick a pin on that one. I always like to finish on a positive. We're just hitting about an hour and a half here now, so
sure.
Have you hope?
Yeah, that's a great question, because see, I've gone through phases like anyone else where I just get pissed off and I want to take a break. Obviously, I had a bit of a hiatus last year. I produced very little. Now I'm back in full-blooded, all guns blazing and so on. I do think there's hope, but I think certain conditions have to be met. And I made an audio piece a couple of months ago talking about how the Irish move, can Ireland be saved? It's a very low-tech audio piece, just ranting for about 20 minutes about the state of affairs in Ireland. I think it can be done, but only if certain conditions are met. And I refuse to just talk about the effects of globalism. Not interested in making videos about, a foreigner committed a crime. Look, there's trans in the school, or these are just the effects. I'm interested in the solution, and I think part of that is we need to sort out the ideological mess in the country. We need to get as many people as we can into the nationalist movement, and to have hopefully a universal ideology, try to get as much unity as we can. Then we have the power to try to stop things. But, until we achieve that, I don't think it can be done. That's what I'm mostly focused on the past year or so in my own thoughts.
Emmet Connor, thank you very much. I have to say, an absolutely fascinating conversation. I'm going to be rattling around for about 3 to 6 hours now in relation to what we spoke about, and I've a bit of research to do as well. You said a couple of names there that I'd be mildly familiar with, but I don't know a lot of their work. And when I post this, you said you did an audio piece in relation to you call it kind of a rant or something like that. When this goes out, this will go out tomorrow. Will you just stick the link into whatever that audio piece is into any of the? It's up on YouTube or X or whatever it goes out on. Just stick the link
Sure.
in there because I'd be very interested in having a listen to it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Stay in the studio for a couple of seconds when I drop you down. I just have a
Thank you,
couple of
Martin.
bits to do. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
Another one in the bag. That was an absolutely fascinating conversation. I really, really enjoyed that. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next week.